There are places, dark corners of the world that time seems to have forgotten. Places where shadows stretch beyond the natural, and where the very air is charged with secrets that no one dares to unearth. Today we'll explore one of those places. A town shrouded in mist, hidden from curious eyes, where its inhabitants seem to harbor something dark, deep, and disturbing. Welcome to Innsmouth. Today, I invite you to join me on a journey into one of the most terrifying and enigmatic stories by the master of cosmic horror, HP Lovecraft. The Shadow Over Innsmouth is not simply a tale of horror. It's an exploration into the darkest corners of humanity, into the ancient fears we all share, and into what might lie beneath the surface of reality as we know it. Lovecraft, a man haunted by a fascination with the unknown, created a universe filled with beings and entities that defy all logic and understanding. He warns us that in his universe, humanity is insignificant, a mere observer in a cosmos governed by forces we cannot even begin to comprehend. And amid all this, in a secluded corner of New England, lies the town of Innsmouth. The protagonist of this story is a young man named Robert Olmsted, an ordinary man, like any of us, who decides to embark on a journey to trace his roots. His curiosity leads him to Innsmouth, a town that appears on few maps and one that, apparently, few people know or even dare to mention. But what is it about this place that even the Massachusetts authorities want to hide? What secrets lurk in its empty streets and decaying buildings? What is that oppressive sense of danger that seems to linger in the air? Innsmouth is different. From the moment Robert Olmsted arrives, he senses that something is terribly wrong. The buildings appear on the verge of collapse, covered in moss, with broken windows that seem to stare back at him. The air is thick with the smell of damp and salt, and the wind that sweeps through the streets carries with it a barely perceptible murmur, as if the town itself were trying to warn him that there's still time to leave. But why would he? After all, what could be lurking in that old fishing port that would inspire so much fear? The people of Innsmouth, they are the key to this mystery. People with a strange appearance, with large, watery eyes, and a way of moving that seems unnatural. They walk hunched over, as if carrying some invisible burden on their shoulders, and many barely speak, mumbling in an incomprehensible dialect. They avoid outsiders, and some even hide their faces beneath hats and scarves, as if they didn't want anyone to look at them too closely. But those who happen to cross Robert Olmsted's path return his gaze with eyes as deep as the ocean, eyes that seem to hold secrets he could never imagine. Then, as our protagonist tries to understand what's happening in this strange town, he meets Zadok Allen, an old drunk who, after a few drinks, starts to talk about things that defy all reason, about ancient pacts and rituals that defy the laws of nature. Zadok warns Olmsted, speaks to him of something called the Esoteric Order of Dagon and of their dark rituals. But Olmsted doesn't want to listen. His curiosity, his desire to know the truth, pushes him to investigate further, to plunge into the shadows surrounding Innsmouth. And so, step by step, word by word, he begins to uncover a reality that will test his sanity, a truth buried in the depths, an ancient horror that lies dormant in the waters of that coastal town, waiting for the moment to awaken. So begins the story of the Shadow Over Innsmouth, one of Lovecraft's darkest tales. Join me as we delve into the depths of a story that blends horror, mysticism, and the boundless fear of the unknown. Today, we'll dive together into the dark waters of Innsmouth, where secrets cannot remain hidden forever, and where sometimes the price of knowing the truth is your very sanity. But be warned, once you know the truth, there is no going back. In this story, HP Lovecraft plunges us into a universe of ancient horrors and forbidden secrets, a universe that seems forever on the verge of revealing a terrible truth if one dares to look closely. The Shadow Over Innsmouth is not just a tale of terror. It's a journey into the darkest recesses of human nature, a place where fear is intertwined with a grim fascination for the unknown. This journey to Innsmouth has its roots in a much broader context, a history stretching back through centuries of mystery, pacts, and dark secrets passed down through generations, shaping the strange and disturbing atmosphere of this forgotten town. Innsmouth is not a place one easily finds on a map. It's a remote location on the coast of Massachusetts, almost cut off from the outside world, shrouded in a constant mist, as if the very sea sought to conceal it. It's within this atmosphere of isolation and mystery that Lovecraft presents us with a story of decay and corruption. Since its founding in the 18th century, Innsmouth was a thriving fishing port, but over time, something happened, something that began to corrode both the town and its inhabitants. Rumor has it that Innsmouth's first settlers established themselves there for easy access to the sea, an inexhaustible source of resources. But little by little, the port began to lose its renown. Some say the waters around Innsmouth are treacherous, filled with hidden rocks and fogs that obscure the horizon. Others claim that the port began to attract something that could only survive in the dark corners of the ocean. Here, the legend comes to life. In the 19th century, a man named Obed Marsh, a prominent resident and founder of the Marsh dynasty in Innsmouth, made a disturbing discovery during one of his trade expeditions. During an expedition to exotic lands, Marsh encountered strange cults, groups of people who seemed to worship beings that weren't human, marine entities to whom they offered sacrifices and in return received prosperity. Driven by greed and desperation at his town's decline, Obed Marsh decided to bring those practices to Innsmouth, thus founding what would become known as the Esoteric Order of Dagon, a secret and dangerous society that began to establish forbidden rituals at the heart of the town. Rumors about this order soon spread, and fear began to envelop Innsmouth. The townspeople, simple and superstitious, began noticing changes in those who participated in the order's rituals. Rumor has it that people would return from these rituals different. Some said that, over time, the faces of the initiates began to transform, their bodies adapting into something alien and monstrous. Their eyes took on an unnatural gleam. Their skin grew pale and damp, and their voices turned into guttural murmurs, as if they were speaking with the weight of the ocean inside them. Over time, the families of Innsmouth became guardians of a dark secret, and those who opposed or tried to escape simply disappeared. Since then, Innsmouth has declined, ensnared in a web of secrets and pacts within human forces. Buildings began to crumble, the streets became overgrown, and the town sank into silence and abandonment. The few who dared to pass near Innsmouth told tales of doors that closed on their own, whispers at the windows, and a thick, briny stench in the air, as if the presence of the sea had invaded every corner. By the time Robert Olmsted hears about Innsmouth, the town is already a place no one wants to approach. The people in neighboring towns barely mention it, and those who've heard the rumors of its dark customs prefer to remain silent. Innsmouth is an open wound, a place that continues to exist solely through the persistence of its inhabitants and the secrets they cannot forget. The Esoteric Order of Dagon, the cult of those dark and marine beings, has become a living legend, one still deeply rooted in the land and in the minds of those who live there. For Lovecraft, The Shadow Over Innsmouth is a warning disguised as a tale. It shows us what happens when humans decide to ally themselves with forces they don't understand, entities that don't belong to our world and that, once summoned, cannot be dismissed. Innsmouth is a trap, a prison where time seems to have stopped, where the inhabitants have ceased to be ordinary people and have become something else, something that watches, that waits, and that lingers. This is the backdrop of Innsmouth, a place where reality and nightmare fuse, where ancient pacts seal the fate of those who accept them. Every corner of this town holds a fragment of this dark story, and every furtive glance from its residents seems to silently scream a warning to anyone who dares approach. Because in Innsmouth, the natural and the supernatural have made a pact that cannot be broken, and anyone who tries to challenge it risks losing their very humanity. In this part of the story, Robert Olmsted, our protagonist and narrator, recounts in the first person how he comes to discover Innsmouth. Drawn by mystery and curiosity, he decides to venture into the town despite the warnings and sinister tales he heard in the neighboring city of Newburyport. At first, his motivations are almost naive. a young explorer with an open mind and a thirst for knowledge, fascinated by the unknown and the exotic. However, as soon as he steps foot in Innsmouth, he begins to feel the presence of something darker, something hiding in the shadows and seemingly watching him from every corner. Olmsted describes his first impressions of Innsmouth in great detail, as if trying to capture every aspect of this town that appears frozen in time. Upon arriving, the first thing he notices is the silence, a heavy, almost palpable silence that envelopes every street and every house like a fog. There are no sounds of everyday life. No children laughing, no casual conversations among neighbors. Only the murmur of the sea and the wind slipping between the dilapidated buildings. This silence, far from being reassuring, fills him with a growing unease. From the very beginning, something inside warns him that there is something deeply wrong with this place. As he ventures further, Olmsted describes Innsmouth as architecture. Crumbling colonial houses, sealed windows, and cracked facades, as if time and salt had eroded every structure. The streets seem deserted, and only a few residents appear occasionally, walking slowly and awkwardly. But it's the appearance of these inhabitants that transforms Olmsted's initial unease into genuine terror. They are strange-looking people with unusually large, bulging eyes, pale and damp skin, and movements that seem unnatural, almost as if they struggle to move on land. He begins to notice an eerie resemblance between them and sea creatures. With each step, Innsmouth reveals its secrets in silence, like a puzzle that doesn't need words. Olmsted tries to find someone to talk to, someone who can explain what he is seeing. Finally, he meets Zadok Allen, an old man from the town who seems to be the only one willing to tell him the truth about what is happening in Innsmouth. Zadok is a character teetering on the brink of madness, tormented by the secrets he knows, secrets that have destroyed his life and the lives of all who once lived peacefully in this place. His voice is a mixture of whispers and restrained screams of terror, and through him, Olmsted begins to understand that Innsmouth hides a secret far beyond anything he could have imagined. Zadok reveals the story of Obed Marsh, the founder of the esoteric order of Dagon, an initiator of a dark pact with marine beings known as the Deep Ones. Marsh, desperate for prosperity and power, had made a pact with these creatures in exchange for wealth and an abundance of fish. The Deep Ones demanded human sacrifices and an even more perverse alliance, unions with the inhabitants of Innsmouth so that hybrid generations would be born, with the promise of immortality for those who adopted their characteristics and joined them in the ocean depths. Zadok's revelation is devastating. Olmsted finds himself caught between horror and fascination, unable to comprehend how such a monstrous pact could have been sealed in this forgotten corner of the world. Zadok continues, explaining how the descendants of Innsmouth's residents, those carrying the blood of the Deep Ones, begin to transform as they age. Their bodies deform, their faces lose humanity, and finally, when the transformation is complete, they abandon the surface to join their ancestors in the underwater cities of the Deep Ones, where they live for eternity. At this point in the story, Olmsted feels an indescribable terror. Every word from Zadok pushes him further toward an abyss, toward a truth that, while incomprehensible, starts to manifest all around him. Innsmouth is not just an ordinary town. It is a place where the boundary between the human world and the realm of cosmic horrors has been shattered. Every corner of the town seems marked by the presence of these marine beings, and each inhabitant carries in their blood the weight of that curse, seemingly as ancient as the ocean itself. Terrified, Olmsted tries to distance himself from Zadok and the story he just heard, but something inside him pushes him to keep exploring the town, to discover if all that the mad old man told him is real. Yet as night falls over Innsmouth, Olmsted senses he is no longer alone. The inhabitants, previously indifferent to his presence, now seem to follow him with their bulging eyes, staring at him like prey. He starts noticing shadows moving in the windows and figures lurking in the twilight, as if the town itself were alive, ready to ensnare him in its dark grasp. This part of the story becomes a chase in which Olmsted desperately tries to escape from Innsmouth while the town, now awake and alert, seems to close its claws around him. He feels the horrors Zadok spoke of are closer than he thought, and that the deep ones, those beings who dwell in the depths, may be watching him from the shadows, ready to take him to their underwater realm. The tension and suspense rise with every step, and Olmsted, nearly breathless, begins to realize it is no longer just about escaping the town. He is trying to flee from something far larger and more terrifying, something that defies reason and seems to be the manifestation of an ancient and unfathomable evil, an evil that watches, pursues him, and that, deep down, he knows he will never be able to forget. As night falls over Innsmouth, Robert Olmsted begins to realize he is trapped in a place far more dangerous than he ever imagined. What had started as a simple investigation driven by curiosity has now turned into a struggle for survival. No longer is it a casual stroll through a forgotten town. It has become a journey toward the revelation of a secret that should have remained buried in the deepest, darkest depths. Every word he had heard from Zadok, the old man, each whisper and warning, now echoes in his mind with a terrifying clarity, as if Innsmouth itself were speaking to him through the wind and shadows. Terrified and with no one to turn to, Olmsted rushes back to his room at the Gilman house, the only place he might find a brief respite. But even there, as he tries to calm himself, he senses something strange, something he cannot see, but that seems to watch him from every dark corner of the room. Suddenly, he is gripped by a horrifying realization. The inhabitants of Innsmouth, those misshapen figures with bulging eyes, won't let him leave so easily. He knows he has seen too much, heard forbidden things, and that now, like many before him, he is a prisoner of a secret as vast as the ocean itself. As the clock ticks slowly, the silence becomes oppressive. Olmsted hears footsteps in the hallway, as if someone were lurking outside his door. The sensation of being watched is so intense that he can barely breathe. And in that moment, he realizes he must escape Innsmouth that very night or risk never seeing the dawn. In a desperate rush, he gathers his belongings and, very cautiously, opens the door of his room to peer into the hallway. But what he sees freezes him in place. There, in the dim corridor, stand several figures. Staring at him with those bulging, watery eyes, they reflect a mix of curiosity and threat. Their skin glistens under the faint light as if covered in scales, and the smell of dampness and salt is unbearable. The appearance of these figures, barely human, confirms what he had already begun to suspect. The people of Innsmouth are not merely humans deformed by hardship, but something far more sinister and ancient. With his heart racing, Olmsted manages to slip toward the stairs. Every step is a challenge to his stealth. Every creak of the wooden floor is a sound that could give him away and seal his fate. In the air, the sense of danger intensifies, as though a presence were following him. And suddenly, his mind is flooded with frantic thoughts. Why are they following him? What do they intend to do? What does it truly mean to be a resident of Innsmouth? He rushes down the stairs of the hotel and into the deserted streets of Innsmouth. Shadows seem to move around him, and the sound of hurried footsteps surrounds him. In the distance, he can see more figures with bulging eyes emerging from their houses, as though the entire town were connected by a collective mind. These creatures, half human, half something indescribable, seem unwilling to let him escape. And in his heart, he knows that the choice to flee is only the beginning of his torment. As he runs, the darkest revelation takes hold of his mind. The great secret of Innsmouth, that which no one had been able to understand, is the connection of the townsfolk with creatures from the depths. The old ones, those same beings Zadok had whispered about in terror. The inhabitants of Innsmouth are not merely decrepit and decaying beings. They are direct descendants of those who, centuries ago, forged a pact with creatures from the ocean depths, the deep ones. These beings, dwelling in the dark and icy depths of the sea, interbred with the humans of Innsmouth in a bond as dark as it is irreversible. Olmsted tries to block the image forming in his mind, the union of men and sea creatures, the blending of their bloodlines to create generations of hybrids. Terror consumes him as he imagines the hidden rituals, the sacrifices, and the secret ceremonies performed in the name of these beings. The esoteric order of Dagon, the cult that controls Innsmouth, is not merely a religious congregation. It is the manifestation of a profane alliance linking humans to the monsters of the deep. In his frenzy, Olmsted reaches the docks, where the smell of fish and algae mingles with the stench of decay. There, while hiding in a dark corner, he hears the sound of water stirring, and he sees them, or at least he believes he does. Shadows in the water seem to come alive, and dark, scaly figures emerge from the depths. The truth hits him with undeniable clarity. These beings, the deep ones, are not only part of Innsmouth's past, but are here now, waiting. And now that he has uncovered the secret, he too has become part of this dark pact, one that allows no betrayal or outside witnesses. In that moment, he understands the magnitude of his mistake. He should never have inquired about Innsmouth, never should have spoken with Zadok or observed the residents so closely. Because now, he too carries part of that secret, a part that will never allow him to return to a normal life. As he sneaks through the shadows, he feels that the town itself seems to push him toward the water, toward the ocean that awaits its victims patiently, as though Innsmouth and its inhabitants were merely an extension of the depths. The scene becomes increasingly surreal, and Olmsted realizes he cannot overcome this presence. At last, he accepts the truth. The secrets he has uncovered are not something a man can bear. The madness, terror, and oppression weighing on his chest become an unbearable burden. And in the recesses of his mind, a voice whispers that perhaps his destiny is to join those beings, to stop fleeing and surrender to the call of the depths. The great secret of Innsmouth is no longer merely a forbidden mystery. It is now his fate. Robert Olmsted runs aimlessly, driven only by the instinct for survival and the terror that floods every corner of his mind. The shadows of Innsmouth's figures seem to multiply around him, their footsteps and whispers filling the deserted streets as if the very town were conspiring to trap him. The alleys close in like a labyrinth of darkness and dampness, and with every turn, the sensation that he's being hunted grows stronger. Still, Olmsted doesn't stop. Desperation and terror push him onward, though the very air feels thicker, stifling, saturated with a humidity that chills him to the bone. As he passes through the streets, heading closer to the town's edge, he notices the sea becoming darker, deeper, as if something within its depths were waiting for him. His only option is to head toward the ocean, hoping that maybe the docks or the beach will offer an escape, a hiding place. He races toward them, leaving behind the crumbling buildings, feeling that each step takes him further from reality and closer to an abyss unfathomable. In the distance, a light flickers at the pier. Olmsted thinks he might be able to hide there, but the hope is fleeting, for when he arrives, the dock is empty, abandoned, as if time itself had ceased to pass in that corner of Innsmouth. Shadows around him grow threatening, and in each darkened corner, figures seem to appear, watching him. They are the townsfolk, yes, but also something else. Their silhouettes distort, their faces taking on inhuman shapes under the sparse light, their eyes reflecting an eerie and terrifying gleam. At that moment, the sound of waves breaks the silence with an unusual crash, and Olmsted feels the ground beneath his feet begin to tremble. From the water, forms emerge that defy all logic, beings torn from the darkest nightmares. They are tall, with scaly, damp skin, and lifeless, enormous eyes that look at him as if he were prey, an intruder in their domain. The deep ones, those very beings he had heard about in rumors, the ones Zadok had warned him about, are now before him, rising from the ocean like shadows given form, as if the sea itself had brought them to life. Olmsted steps back, but realizes he's surrounded. The people of Innsmouth have closed in around him, watching him silently, their lips barely moving as they chant something incomprehensible. Somehow, he understands that these chants are not meant to frighten him, but to invoke something, to summon a presence even more terrifying. The villager's eyes turn toward the ocean, as if awaiting the arrival of something monumental, something ancient, something that has been awakened from the depths. Madness takes hold of him as he tries to run, to escape, but the figures stop him, and the chanting grows louder, reverberating in the air like a ritual that demands his sacrifice. In the midst of desperation, Olmsted feels he's losing control of his own will. Something in that chant, something in those gazes weakens him, paralyzes him until he can no longer move. It's as if Innsmouth itself were a trap, and he was the last insect caught in its web. Suddenly, the sea roils with a supernatural force. The waves rise into the air as if guided by a will of their own. And in the depths of that dark water, Olmsted glimpses a colossal figure that seems to be watching him. He doesn't know if it's his imagination, if terror is playing tricks on him, but he swears that there, deep in the ocean, something immense stirs, something that the people of Innsmouth revere and that the deep ones have come to accompany. At that moment, Olmsted realizes he's facing a force he cannot comprehend, a presence beyond his understanding, one that transcends reality. He feels his mind cracking, as if every fragment of sanity is being torn away by the weight of what he's witnessing. He is not alone in the universe, not more than a mere creature in a world controlled by entities that have existed since time immemorial. And these beings have chosen him, Robert Olmsted, to be the witness to their power and perhaps their next offering. As his strength leaves him, Olmsted hears the last word of the chant echo in the air, as if the sea itself were whispering it. The villagers, the deep ones, they all watch him in silence, and he knows he is lost, that mercy does not exist in that place. A final thought passes through his mind. He has found the answer he so desperately sought, but now he wishes he had never set foot in Innsmouth. And then, the world goes black, the sea engulfs him, and Robert Olmsted becomes part of Innsmouth's secret, another soul lost in the uncharted depths of eternal mystery. After miraculously escaping the horror spiral in Innsmouth, Robert Olmsted returns to the world he once considered safe, but nothing he has lived through leaves him. His mind remains trapped by the images of the creatures emerging from the ocean, by the hypnotic chants that still echo in his memories, and by the glimpse of a colossal presence, older and more terrible than anything human. However, he manages to return to his home, to the normal world. But this normality no longer offers him comfort. The shadow of Innsmouth has been imprinted on his mind, and it begins to haunt him in his dreams, turning each night into a living nightmare. In the days following his return, Olmsted tries to convince himself that it was all a horrible hallucination. He immerses himself in books, researches university library documents, and reviews his notes repeatedly, searching for an elusive logic, some rational explanation. However, the more he tries to understand, the more he realizes that what he experienced in Innsmouth was not just any nightmare. It was a glimpse into something deep and true. To accept that means to assume that forces exist beyond any human comprehension. Over time, Olmsted begins to notice something even more disturbing. During his investigations, he stumbles upon old records of his own family, documents, and letters that unearth a truth he never suspected. He discovers that, through generations, his lineage is connected to Innsmouth, that a distant ancestor was one of the strange town's inhabitants. The blood of those who worshipped Dagon and performed ancient rituals runs in his veins. This revelation hits him like lightning. He is not just an outsider who escaped Innsmouth. He is part of Innsmouth. At that moment, something within him begins to change. At first, he convinces himself it's just the effects of suggestion, of the impact left on him by that experience. But with each passing day, he feels his body, his very flesh, starting to transform. The texture of his skin, his night vision, even his physical resilience, grows stranger, as if a latent inheritance is awakening. Olmsted finds himself trapped between rationality and horror, between his desire to escape his fate and the certainty that it's already too late. The nights become unbearable. In his dreams, he feels the call of the ocean, an inexplicable attraction to the waters, to that submerged world in the depths where the ancestors of Innsmouth still exist, where the creatures he once saw emerge await. He feels, with increasing intensity, that his destiny is not to escape, but to return. This time, not as a victim or intruder, but as one of them. An uncontrollable impulse begins to take hold of him. The nights grow longer, and the sound of waves follows him, even in his house, where silence once reigned. As if the ocean itself wanted to whisper to him, as if the call of Dagon and the ancients echoed in his blood. Soon, he understands that his only option is to follow that call, even if it means losing all trace of humanity. In the final act of his life as a human, Olmsted writes a letter. In it, he recounts everything he's experienced and suggests that, although many may not believe it, the threat of Innsmouth remains latent. It's a warning to anyone who dares to seek the truth. He describes the sensations that torment him, the changes in his body and mind, and the irresistible pull toward the sea. Once he finishes, he leaves the letter in a place he hopes will one day be found, so that at least someone else will know the terrible truth. Finally, on a full moon night, Robert Olmsted walks into the darkness, toward the ocean that calls him, toward the black waters that await him. He vanishes into the shadows, his silhouette fading into the tide, and his human form disappears with every step he takes. Olmsted joins his kind, the inhabitants of the depths, the ancient beings who gave him life. The man he was dissolves, and in his place, a creature emerges who will forever follow Innsmouth's ancestral paths. Rumor has it that on stormy nights when the sea pounds the rocks with fury, strange shadows can be seen in the water, figures that move unnaturally, as if something guides them from the ocean's depths. Locals whisper of a new presence in the waters, a being whose story and transformation lie hidden in the depths, who now watches humans from afar, patiently awaiting the moment when others too will answer Innsmouth's eternal call. Let's delve into the main themes of The Shadow Over Innsmouth, a work that, like much of Lovecraft's work, contains a set of fears and reflections that resonate both on a personal and cosmic level. The themes that Lovecraft develops in this story go beyond a surface-level horror tale. Instead, they invite us to explore the anxieties that haunted the author's mind and, in many ways, continue to haunt humanity. The first central theme in The Shadow Over Innsmouth is the fear of the unknown and the unknowable. This is perhaps the fundamental pillar of all of Lovecraft's work, and in this story, it is presented in a palpable and disturbing way. Innsmouth represents an isolated world, a microcosm of the hidden, a place where common rules seem distorted. The townspeople, with their furtive glances and deformed faces, are only a glimpse of a much deeper and older secret. This fear of the unknown not only affects the characters in the story, but also the reader, who, like Robert Olmsted, finds themselves trapped in a strange environment where every detail seems to harbor a sinister meaning. Lovecraft plays on the discomfort of what we cannot see, of what we barely manage to glimpse. He reminds us that, in his universe, there are things that are not meant to be understood, and that those who dare to delve into these mysteries pay a devastating price. Another essential theme is cosmic horror and the insignificance of humankind in the vast fabric of the universe. Lovecraft shows us in Innsmouth that there are forces and entities far older and more powerful than our minds can grasp. During his stay in the town, Olmsted realizes that the creatures of the depths are not mere beasts, but beings with their own consciousness, history, and a hierarchy that transcends any human order. The figure of Dagon, an ancient god, introduces the idea that humanity is at best an accident, and at worst, an insignificant creature inhabiting a world that doesn't truly belong to it. In The Shadow Over Innsmouth, Lovecraft emphasizes that there are cosmic laws and orders that do not consider humanity, and any attempt to unravel these secrets leads to madness or inevitable and terrifying transformation. At this point, the theme of bodily horror and physical degeneration takes on significance. The inhabitants of Innsmouth display strange and deformed physical characteristics that suggest a mixing of races between humans and marine entities. This physical degeneration is both literal and symbolic. On the one hand, it represents the corruption of human blood, an alteration of what we consider normal and acceptable in terms of appearance and genetic heritage. On the other, it symbolizes moral corruption, a descent into barbarism and the primitive. The physical transformation of the inhabitants is also a chilling reminder that the human body is vulnerable and malleable, and that, in Lovecraft's universe, the boundaries between the human and the inhuman are blurred and constantly threatened. The story explores the idea that the physical and the spiritual are interconnected, and that degeneration in one sense also affects the other. It is also impossible to ignore the theme of inheritance and the inevitability of destiny. Lovecraft introduces here an inescapable fate for Olmsted, who initially perceives himself as an outsider in a strange town, only to discover that his blood irrevocably connects him to Innsmouth and its inhabitants. This revelation is devastating and raises an unsettling existential question. How much of who we are is determined by our roots, by our heritage? Can we really escape what runs in our veins? For Lovecraft, the answer seems to be a grim no. Through Olmsted, he shows us that heritage is a prison from which there is no escape, and that even attempts to live as individuals free from our ancestors are doomed to fail if our roots bind us to ancient horrors. Another theme latent in the Shadow Over Innsmouth is isolation and paranoia. From the moment Olmsted arrives in Innsmouth, the atmosphere is one of distrust and suspicion. The townspeople behave in a hostile and reserved manner, keeping the protagonist constantly on edge. This paranoia grows as Olmsted begins to uncover dark details about the history and practices of Innsmouth, and it intensifies when he realizes that he, too, might be connected to these horrors. Lovecraft uses this sense of isolation to show how fear and paranoia can corrode the human mind. Like Olmsted, the reader feels trapped, with no escape, within the dark and oppressive boundaries of Innsmouth. Lastly, a subtle yet significant theme is the rejection of humanity and the attraction toward the unknown. As Olmsted discovers his lineage, he experiences a strange mix of horror and attraction to his inevitable destiny. This contradictory feeling of fear and attraction to the unknown reflects Lovecraft's feelings toward humanity and the supernatural. Through Olmsted's transformation, Lovecraft explores the possibility of a fate that draws us towards something greater than ourselves, even if that something is terrifying and entirely inhuman. The final revelation, that Olmsted feels an irresistible urge toward the ocean and its inhabitants, is the culmination of this theme, showing that in Lovecraft's universe, we are not only unable to resist the call of the unknown, but that deep within us, we may yearn to lose our humanity and become part of that ineffable horror. In The Shadow Over Innsmouth, Lovecraft delivers a story that is, in essence, a meditation on the limits of the human mind, the fragility of our identity, and the inevitability of a cosmic destiny from which we cannot escape. Each theme is woven into an atmosphere of constant tension and mystery, a work that challenges our understanding and leaves us with a disturbing sense of helplessness in the face of an indifferent and terrifying universe. At the end of this unsettling journey through The Shadow Over Innsmouth, it is not hard to understand why this work has left such a deep mark on horror literature. There is something almost hypnotic in the way Lovecraft intertwines every detail, building a universe where the everyday and the incomprehensible converge at a point of inevitable collision. The story of Innsmouth is, at its core, a warning and a revelation about the very nature of horror. It is not so much what we can see and understand, but what we can barely glimpse in the shadows that evokes the greatest fear. The conclusion of this story does not provide clear answers or a comforting ending. Instead, Lovecraft leaves us in a state of uncertainty, of ambiguity, with a final image that is as disturbing as it is captivating. Robert Olmsted, our protagonist and guide on this dark journey, discovers that his connection to Innsmouth is not merely the result of research, but something far deeper and darker. A blood tie, a destiny he cannot, and does not, want to avoid. This is where Lovecraft showcases his skill at playing with the boundaries of identity and humanity. As Olmsted accepts his fate, we also witness his collapse as a human being, as we knew him. Lovecraft suggests that there are truths about ourselves that are better left undiscovered, but once revealed, they transform us forever. Personally, this outcome strikes me as both fascinating and disturbing in equal measure. Lovecraft does not aim to offer us a moral lesson or a satisfying conclusion. On the contrary, he envelopes us in a spiral of darkness where we feel the weight of the unknown, of the invisible forces that, unbeknownst to us, shape our lives. It is impossible to read this story without feeling a weight on the chest, without experiencing that unsettling whisper that there is something in the universe much bigger than us, and that, like the inhabitants of Innsmouth, we may not be prepared to face it. On a narrative level, The Shadow Over Innsmouth also demonstrates Lovecraft's genius for creating atmospheres. From the moment Robert Olmsted steps foot in that gloomy coastal town, every scene is imbued with an air of decay, abandonment, and untold secrets. Lovecraft's descriptions of the streets, the buildings, and especially the faces of the inhabitants make us feel each detail as though it were etched into our memory. It is not just the fear of the supernatural that overwhelms us, but the horror of what is visible. Decay, physical degeneration, the sense of being trapped in a place where time and logic no longer make sense. Innsmouth is as real a place as any other, and yet it feels like a separate dimension, a space in which the laws of nature have been forever subverted. On a personal level, this story strikes me as a masterpiece because it encapsulates cosmic horror in its purest form. Lovecraft reminds us that the universe is vast, indifferent, and utterly incomprehensible. We are but particles in a larger scheme, and our struggles, our desires, our laws, everything seems insignificant in comparison to the forces that, invisible, watch us from the shadows. In Lovecraft's universe, concepts like justice or morality are meaningless. The creatures that dwell in the depths of the ocean, Olmsted's ancestors, and the inhabitants of Innsmouth are neither evil nor good. They simply exist, and their very existence is a threat to human perception. If I had to summarize what strikes me most about this story, I would say it is the feeling of fatality, of an inevitable destiny that weighs on every page. As we move through the story, it becomes clear that Olmsted has no choice but to accept his heritage. This lack of control, this impotence in the face of his lineage and the history of Innsmouth itself, is what transforms this story into something more than just a tale of terror. Lovecraft presents us with a dark mirror, one in which we see our fragility and our ignorance reflected. What do we really know about our own roots? How many dormant secrets lie in our blood? Over the years, The Shadow Over Innsmouth has been interpreted as a critique, a warning, or even as a parable of otherness. However, at its core, the story is an exploration of the limits of human understanding and the inevitable attraction we feel toward the abyss. Olmsted becomes part of that abyss, he merges with it, and it is then that the story reaches its climax of cosmic horror. It is not just the physical transformation that awaits him, but an acceptance of the darkness, the immensity, and the eternity that the ocean represents. As a reader, The Shadow Over Innsmouth is not a story you can simply close and forget. It stays etched in my mind, resonating like a whisper, a warning that there are things in the universe best left undisturbed. Lovecraft, with his unmatched mastery, invites us to walk the fine line between curiosity and terror, between understanding and madness. He subtly, yet powerfully warns us that there are secrets that do not need to be uncovered, and those who dare challenge them will inevitably be consumed by them. In conclusion, The Shadow Over Innsmouth is much more than a horror story. It is an exploration of what it means to be human in a universe that does not need us, a universe that will continue to exist long after we have disappeared. Lovecraft confronts us with our own mortality and our insignificance, and he does so with a rawness and intensity that few stories can match. At the heart of Innsmouth, among its dark secrets and its inhabitants with deep, distant gazes, lies a terrifying truth. The universe is cold, vast, and above all, indifferent. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Your support means a lot and motivates me to keep creating more interesting content. Also, if you're not subscribed yet, join our community so you don't miss out on anything. Thanks for your support.